Do you believe that death is an immutable law of nature beyond dispute? You are gravely mistaken. There are places on our planet where death itself has been forbidden, and this is not a fabrication. In some settlements, your family could be fined for such a thing. In others, your body risks becoming a source of biological hazard. And elsewhere, city officials issue such decrees as a form of protest against the government. It sounds implausible, but this is reality. Our first stop on the map is a remote corner of the Earth. Welcome to Longyearbyen. This is the northernmost settlement in the world with a population exceeding 1,000 people. Here, on the Svalbard archipelago, eternal polar night, icy winds and polar bears reign. By the way, there are more of them here than people. It would seem like a harsh land for tough people, miners, scientists and Arctic explorers. But this charming little town with its brightly colored houses, so picturesquely contrasting with the snow cover, harbors a sinister secret. Here it is officially forbidden to die, and this law has been in effect for more than 70 years. Why? Could it be that the mayor of the town thinks of himself as a deity? Or have they discovered the elixir of eternal life here? The answer lies beneath our feet. It's all about the permafrost. In Longyearbyen, the soil never completely thaws. The ground temperature remains below zero all year round, which creates a unique but troubling problem. Under normal circumstances, when a person is buried, nature takes its course. The body decomposes, returning to the earth. The natural cycle of life comes to an end. But Svalbard is a giant natural freezer. Everything that ends up in this ground is preserved forever. In the mid-20th century, in the 1950s, local authorities noticed something strange at the old cemetery. The ground was literally pushing coffins to the surface because of cycles of freezing and partial thawing of the upper layer. But the real horror was realized a little later. Scientists discovered that the bodies of people buried here during the infamous Spanish flu epidemic in 1918 had hardly decomposed. And what does that mean for us, the living? It means that the virus contained within them could still be alive, or at the very least, its genetic material has been preserved in perfect condition. Imagine a horror movie scenario: global warming, old graves being exposed, and the virus that claimed 50 million lives 100 years ago is unleashed once again. This is not just a theory. In the late 1990s, a group of scientists actually exhumed several bodies from the permafrost in Longyearbyen and discovered traces of that very 1918 influenza virus in the tissues. That is precisely why in 1950, an uncompromising law was passed: no burials in Longyearbyen. How does this work in practice? It's rather cynical but effective. If you live in Longyearbyen and become seriously ill, or if you are very old and your time is near, you will be politely but quite insistently asked to leave the island. You will be put on a plane or a ship and sent to mainland Norway, to Oslo or Tromsø. You will spend your final days there. And if death comes suddenly, for example, from a heart attack or as a result of a snowmobile accident, in that case, your body will not be left on the island. It will be packed up and sent to the mainland. The only exception is cremation. It is allowed to bury an urn with ashes, but to do so you need to collect so many documents and obtain personal permission from the governor that very few people go through with it. Longyearbyen is a place where time seems to stand still. Here, you can't be born since the local hospital doesn't have a maternity ward, and you can't die. This is a city intended exclusively for the living, the healthy and the able-bodied. A strange utopia in the ice. From an icy hell, we move to a true paradise garden. Japan, the island of Itsukushima, better known to tourists as Miyajima. You've probably seen this place on postcards, the huge red torii gates that during high tide seem to float above the water. This is a place of incredible beauty and tranquility, where deer freely roam the streets, begging for treats from passers-by. But behind this serenity lies one of the strictest religious prohibitions in human history. On this island, dying is forbidden. And the reason is not fear of viruses, but the fear of spiritual defilement. According to Shintoism, the indigenous religion of Japan, death, blood, and the process of decay are considered kegare, which translates as defilement or impurity. The island of Itsukushima is revered not just as land, but as the body of a deity. All the soil here is sacred. To set foot on it is already a great privilege. and to defile the divine land with death is a terrible sin that could bring misfortune upon the entire people. That is why, historically, there was the strictest prohibition here: no births and no deaths. Yes, that's right. Birth is also associated with blood. So, as soon as a pregnant woman's due date approached, she was taken off the island by boat to the mainland. The same applied to the elderly and the seriously ill. As soon as the priests noticed that someone was touched by the breath of death, they were immediately removed from the island. History records cases when this prohibition was put to the test by blood. The most famous and dramatic moment was the Battle of Miyajima in 1555. This was the only time the sacred land was defiled. The forces of the Mori clan achieved victory over their enemy here. Hundreds of corpses covered the sacred slopes of Mount Myson, and the ground was soaked with blood. What happened next? The victors did not celebrate. They were horrified by what they had done. Immediately after the battle, an unprecedented cleansing operation began. The bodies were not buried. Instead, they were hastily loaded onto ships and taken to the mainland. The earth where drops of blood had fallen was literally cut out, dug up, and also taken away. The buildings were scrubbed until they shone. The entire island underwent a complex and lengthy purification ritual to appease the angry spirits. Today, of course, the rules have become somewhat more lenient. Tourists are not searched for deadly diseases, but the law still has a huge influence on the cultural code. There are no cemeteries on the island, not a single one. There are no crematoriums here. If someone dies on the island today, for example a tourist, it becomes a huge logistical and ethical problem. The body must be removed as soon as possible, and the family of the deceased along with the locals are required to perform purification rituals. Think about that. An island where for thousands of years people have lived, loved, prayed, but not a single one of them has remained here forever. And Tsukushima strives to remain eternally pure, eternally alive. It's beautiful, no doubt, but it's a bit unsettling to realize that in the eyes of the local gods, your death is just dirt that needs to be urgently removed. If in Svalbard death was banned by scientists and in Japan by priests, then in France it was done by disgruntled officials. And this is probably the most absurd part of our list. Let's move to the year 2007, a small picturesque village of Cugnot in the south of France. The population is small, life is peaceful, vineyards, sunshine, but Mayor Philippe Bern has a serious problem. The local cemetery is full. There are no spaces left, not a single free patch of land. The mayor wants to expand the cemetery, but the only available land nearby belongs to the military, and the French Ministry of Defense gives a categorical refusal. The bureaucratic correspondence drags on for years. The mayor is desperate. The residents are aging. What to do with the bodies? And so Philippe Bern decides to take extreme measures. He issues an official decree which states roughly the following: all persons who do not have a place in the cemetery are forbidden to die within the territory of the commune of Cogny. Violators will be severely punished. Of course, this was an act of desperation and sarcasm. How can you punish a corpse, issue a fine, or put it in jail? But it worked. The news about the village of immortals spread throughout France. Journalists besieged the Ministry of Defense with uncomfortable questions. Why are you forcing people to live forever? Under public pressure and general laughter, the military gave in and allocated land. The mayor won. The decree was repealed. People once again regained their legal right to die in peace. But a bad example is contagious. In 2008, the mayor of another French village, Sarrans, Gérard Lalande, faced exactly the same problem. The cemetery was full. The court prohibited any expansion. Inspired by his colleague's example, Mayor Lalande issued an even stricter decree. All residents were forbidden to die, and violators of this order would be subject to severe sanctions. In an interview, the mayor said with a straight face, "We may have to start fining the deceased since they don't know how to behave." The bitterest irony of this story is that Mayor Gérard Lalande himself died 10 months after issuing his decree. Fortunately for him, they still managed to find a spot for him in the cemetery, and the harsh sanctions were not applied to him. These stories show us another side of the problem. Death is not only a tragedy, it's also a matter of logistics. A similar story happened in Italy, in the town of Falciano del Massico. But here, the drama unfolded quite recently in 2012. It's a classic story for Italy, a divorce. But not between spouses, between towns. For a long time, Falciano del Masico was part of a neighboring town. They shared infrastructure and a common cemetery. But at some point, Falciano decided to become an independent municipality. They filed the paperwork, elected their own mayor, Giulio Cesare Fava, and started living separately. And then a delicate detail came to light. When the land was divided, the old cemetery remained on the neighbors' territory, and the new, proud town didn't have one of its own. The neighbors simply said, "Well, you're independent now, so bury your own people wherever you want. Our plots are for our own." Mayor Fava found himself at an impasse. Building a new cemetery would take years and cost millions of euros, and, as luck would have it, people just keep getting older. In desperation, he signs a decree. Residents, as well as guests of the town, are forbidden from leaving the realm of the living to depart for the hereafter. The mayor personally went around to the residents and pleaded with them. "Please, just hold on a little longer. Don't die while we're working on this." The residents took it with typical Italian humor. One of the local old men told journalists, "Yesterday I was feeling unwell, but then I remembered the mayor's law and had to get better. After all, I'm a law-abiding citizen." Unfortunately, the law of nature is stronger than the mayor's law. Literally just a couple of days after the decree, 2 elderly residents broke the law and died. Their families had to take the bodies to a neighboring town and pay a huge amount of money for a spot in someone else's cemetery, since the local benefits no longer applied to them. And finally, we travel back in time to the cradle of civilization, ancient Greece, the island of Delos. Today, it is an open-air museum and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Tourists wander among the ruins taking selfies by the famous lion statues. But 2,500 years ago, the largest experiment in creating an island of immortals was conducted here. Delos was not just an island. It was the birthplace of Apollo, the god of light, art, and healing, and his sister Artemis. The land was so sacred that its holiness became a real curse for ordinary people. In the 5th century BC, the Athenians decided to purify Delos. They consulted the oracle and he supposedly said, "The island must be free from birth and death." At first, they simply dug up all the old graves and transported the bones to the neighboring island of Rhenia. But that didn't seem to be enough. A law was passed. No one was allowed to be born and no one was allowed to die on Delos. Imagine living in such a place. It was a wealthy trading center, home to thousands of people. But if a woman went into labor, she was hurriedly put on a boat and taken across the strait to the neighboring island. If an old man started coughing up blood or a warrior was wounded, they weren't treated on the spot. They were literally thrown off the island. To die on the sacred land of Apollo was considered a personal insult to the god. The neighboring island of Rhenia turned into a strange place, a giant maternity ward and a giant morgue at the same time. An island of life and death serving the island of eternity. Why was this necessary? Power. Control over Delos meant control over religion and trade. By declaring the island pure, the Athenians emphasized their own chosenness. Today, Delos is uninhabited. Only archaeologists and museum caretakers live there. And you know what's interesting? Technically, the law is still in effect. It is forbidden to stay there overnight without special permission. There are no hotels there and certainly no burials there. Apollo still jealously guards his domain. Longyearbyen and Tsukushima, Cugno, Falciano Delos. Cold, faith, bureaucracy, money, and history, 5 different reasons, but one goal: to abolish death. Of course, all these laws cannot stop the physical process. The heart will stop, the neurons will go dark. But these places remind us of an amazing trait of humanity. We do not want to accept the end. We build cities in the ice where bodies do not decay. We invent gods who demand eternal purity. We write laws trying to bring order to the chaos of non-existence. The ban on death is not just a legal curiosity, it is a monument to our fear and our hope. Hope that if you draft the right document, if you find a place cold enough or an island sacred enough, then maybe, just maybe, it won't affect us. And while immortality hasn't been invented yet, my advice to you is carefully check the local laws before you set out on your journey. Otherwise, if you suddenly decide to kick the bucket in Longyearbyen, instead of eternal rest, your relatives might end up with a hefty fine. That's all from me. Write in the comments which of these places you would like to visit. But only while you're still alive, and subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about the world in ways that guidebooks never do. See you soon. And live long. That's not advice, it's the law.